Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. We are happy to be here with Christophe No. Hi, Christophe.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone.
Christophe is going to talk today in our iTop Tech Tips webinar about the extensions we have done for Microsoft Azure to help you connect and integrate your CMDB with iTop CMDB.
Well, as everyone knows, many organizations, let's say more and more organizations and customers are using cloud computing. So there is a need to somehow enrich iTop CMDB with elements from this cloud computing environment. We are not anymore in a situation where we need to document our on-premises CIs, but we need to have more information about this outside world within iTop. And in the case of Azure, as you know, this service that Microsoft is providing is huge, is very enormous in terms of number of CIs that it documents, in terms of things that you can do with it. Of course, the purpose of the collector is not to recreate within iTop the whole view or the whole details of what Azure can provide you with, but to have a consolidated view, centralized view of the most important details that are meaningful from a CMDB perspective, from a configuration management database perspective. And of course, everything is not possible without some automation, and that's precisely the purpose of this collector, to do things automatically. Let's go into the details of what we call Azure extension, which is actually made of two parts. There is first a data model that will enrich iTop CMDB. You know how iTop is working. You can modelize what you want in it, and through specific extensions, you can bring more CIs, more objects, and that's what this first extension is doing. It brings all the Azure objects that we are dealing with in this collector. There are something like 15, 17 objects. That's a start. We had to do a choice, and this is precisely what this extension is doing. It adds to your iTop the Azure objects. And of course, linked to that, in relation with Microsoft, we have a data collector that will do the, most part of the job, collecting data from Microsoft and pushing them to iTop. This system of extension is compatible with the LTS version of iTop, the 2.7, and the new 3.x branch for both the community version and all the products that Combodo is providing, Essential, Professional, etc. Let's skip straight away in the Azure data model. Actually, there were 17 new classes that the extension is bringing. Well, the screen may be a bit small for you, but we have categorized the different classes by big classes, big containers, let's say, to group the different subjects that we are approaching within these extensions, like computing world, storage world, or networking world. Definitely in the networking world, we have more information than in the others. But okay, that's the list of classes that we collect and that we synchronize with Azure and iTop. The content of each classes, of course, will not reproduce the rich environment that Azure is providing. As I said at the beginning, we will only collect the main attributes and links, just to have, let's say, an overall view of what we have in Azure. So we have selected some attributes for each of the classes that we are collecting, and we are trying to, as well, of course, adding the links between these different objects. That's one of the main features that iTop is providing. As you know, it's the impact analysis and all the linkage between the different CIs that makes the CMDB interesting. At this stage, we have this list of attributes. If you wish, we can. I mean, you can. You will be able to enrich the class with new attributes, and over time, if we see that we have missed some important attributes, we will still be able to add them in the data model. And finally, as I said, that's an example of a disk that we collect from Azure. It has a few attributes like its location, its state, and so on. Okay, and what we have provided the extension with is this little link on the other menu side of the CMDB, Azure. It symbolizes a little cloud, and this little link will open in another web page the URL that explains and highlights the details within Azure environment of the class that you are starting with. So here we were on a disk. Clicking on Azure link will open this Microsoft Azure page where you will see all the details that you need on Azure. Again, Azure will give you the full list of details. iTop will summarize the most important view from a CMDB perspective. That was for the extension that provides the data model. Now let's dive into the data collector, which purpose is precisely to collect the data. It's, if you already know the iTop or Combodo collectors that we propose, like LDAP, vSphere, and so on. It's the same principle. It's just, into bracket, an ATL that will connect to Microsoft Azure through Microsoft REST API, get the different data that it needs to get, process this data, copy them locally in an intermediate file, and then push them through the well-known synchro import service into iTop that will do the job of synchronizing the data between iTop and the external world. Of course, as I said before, all this process needs to work with an iTop that has the Azure data model embedded in it. The communication is done through the requirement made by Microsoft. So we are authenticating ourselves through OAuth2, and we will use the JSON format to retrieve the data from the Azure API. So how does it work? When you want to collect something for each of the class that we need to collect, if we talk about the disks that we saw before on the page, on the iTop screen, well, we are at the stage where we want to collect the disk. First, we will check if the authentication parameters that we have previously retrieved from Microsoft are still valid. These are stored on a local file within the collector data structure. If these ones are okay, well, then we can check with Microsoft to get what we need, or we need to again contact Microsoft to renew the credential that were expired in this bearer token CSV file. So Microsoft will provide us what we need if we are providing, of course, the right client ID and the right client secret keys. That happens every time we want to collect a class. For each class, we go through this process. Okay, so we read the authentication parameters. If they are obsolete, we ask Microsoft to renew them. We store them locally, and then once these authentication parameters are stored, we can contact Microsoft with the right credential elements to play the URL that will provide us with the data that we expect, with the real payload that we need. Again, this is done for each of the class that we need to collect. Of course, the bearer token has some validity that is long enough to work for several class collections. Next, the collector works in a specific order. First of all, imagine if we are the first time that we start the collector, we try to identify the subscriptions. I don't have any data within iTop about Azure. Start my collector first time. First run, it will identify the Azure subscription and it will synchronize them in iTop. And that's how the object will appear within iTop with some information, and most important information, as you can see in the red circle, is the attribute that specify if the object below this subscription need to be discovered or not. For a given organization, you may have multiple subscriptions. The collector will collect them all, and up to you then as an administrator to decide which subscription you want to collect or not. Once this is done, the next time the collector will run, it will talk to iTop, decide, we'll realize which subscription it needs to collect, and then collect the data for each of the subscriptions that need to be discovered. What about object reconciliation? So Azure will provide us some objects. We have some objects already in iTop. How do you make them match? Well, by default, we do the reconciliation based on the ID of the object, the Azure ID. This one is unique, so there should not be any problem. However, we can sometimes we need to use some other attributes to do the reconciliation, like for establishing the relations between objects, or in special cases where that happens to one of our customers. Sometimes they are flushing completely the content of a subscription, and they rebuild it, same subscription, and they rebuild the same object for some reason, and we need to reconcile no more on the ID, because from one subscription to the other, even if it's a clone, the ID may have changed, and we allow reconciliation on tags or other elements. That's for the logical side. On the technical implementation, the detail of the subscription is based on what? First of all, we have two GitHub repositories where we have the data collector for the Microsoft Azure and the data collector base. All our collectors are based, as it is mentioned, on this framework, data collector base, on which we build our different collectors. So collector base of iTop and the Microsoft specific collectors. We have some configuration for the collector, like what class do we want to manage, which plan do we follow to collect the data. Of course, some class need to be collected in a specific order. You will not collect the disk if you have not collected the servers that host the disk. So a specific order needs to be followed, and that's what is defined in this configuration parameters. And then once once everything is defined, we collect the class. So there is one file, dedicated files per class. This is specific to the standard to the data collector in iTop. We have files per class, a PHP file that describes the how a specific class will be handled by the collector, and a collection guide that explains what we need to do specific for the collection together, the whole or the different classes together. So within that collection guide, you will find the details on the URL that need to be created or used to retrieve data. Each class has its specific URL. Maybe you have already seen the REST API documentation of iTop, of Microsoft Azure on Microsoft documentation. It may have very, very different parameters for each of the class, so to you to adapt to yourself. We provide the revision of the API, not only the URL is specific to each class, but on top of that, you need to precise which version, which revision of the API you are using. These ones are indicated through dates. This revision are named like date. And we provide as well a list of methods that need to be run when we do this collect of object. So there are some preparation work, processing work that needs to be done before the data is actually synchronized within iTop. And finally, the collector is clever enough to adapt to the different iTop's data model. When you install iTop, you have several choices, several options, and the collector will, as a whole, will adapt itself to this different data model. Some attributes may be present in one case and not present in another case. So as a summary, that's how it works for the whole discovery. First of all, we have, or let's say it's the first time that we're running, so we don't know anything about the authentication token that we need to use. So we will contact Microsoft. I mean, the collector will do that for you, of course. We'll contact Microsoft and we'll get this bearer token parameters. First, as I said before, we will discover the subscriptions. Once the subscription is discovered, we tell the collector if they are actually further discovered or not. And then the collector will read information on your iTop. And for the subscription that need to be collected, will follow its collection plan, start with maybe the locations, the resource groups, and then why not the application services, as you can see in this list, at the stage, the virtual machine, the disk, and everything. And so all objects are collected sequentially. I mean, all the groups of objects are collected sequentially, stored locally. CSV files are processed and stored locally as well. And finally, these are pushed to iTop for synchronization, and the synchronization engine on iTop is running. That's basically what the collector is doing, collecting subscription and all the objects that are below the subscription and pushing them to iTop. Future evolution of the collectors, as we may not have said it, but it's the first revision that we are releasing soon. What we have done today is not linked to the IP world. So we will add specific classes that are dedicated to IPs. We already have some requests for that. That will allow us to integrate the Team IP extensions within this collection, within this Azure synchronizations for, as usual, good or best practice for IP and IP plan management. We will enrich the impact analysis between the different CIs, so provide more relations between CIs to provide you with a better impact analysis. Maybe add additional objects according to the feedback that we will have. Maybe, as I said, we will be missing some attributes. If required, we may extend the localization. Azure is mainly used in English, but well, why not having it in Spanish or German? And like any other collectors, we'll need to handle specifically the obsolescence policies, deletion policies for the different elements that we have collected. But while this one is the last element is more customer usage, we will not know by default which policy you may want to use for that. So this is subject to questions.
Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you very much, Christophe. It was really interesting.
Thank you everyone. Bye-bye.